Good afternoon, everybody. This is Paige Godfrey here at Slooh, and I am going to talk to you today about the Star of Bethlehem. So either maybe you're celebrating Christmas, it's Christmas Eve, or maybe you just finished celebrating Hanukkah, maybe you're choosing to celebrate something different or nothing at all. But we have an interesting story about the Star of Bethlehem, which is commonly referred to around this time of year. And so we just want to chat a little bit with you about the science behind it. This is not a holiday that is shy of astronomy. So this Star of Bethlehem is commonly asked to astronomers, can you explain it? And, it's interesting to say that we cannot. For the reference, the Star of Bethlehem is found in the nativity story of the Gospel of Matthew in the Bible. Reportedly, it is a star, and it was seen in the night sky, but that was a unique star. It wasn't something that was there all the time, and it led the wise men to Jerusalem. There, they met the King Herod of Judea and asked him where the King of Jews had been born, referring to Jesus Christ's birth. The king directs them to Bethlehem, just to the south of Jerusalem, and it is written in the Gospel of Matthew as saying, "Now, when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him." In this biblical account, in this Gospel of Matthew, there are about 9 different qualities of the Star of Bethlehem that are important to note as we move on to talk about what this astronomical event could have been. And they are that it signified birth, it signified kingship, it was related to the Jewish nation, it rose in the east, which can also be taken as a rising, such as the sun, which rises in the east and sets in the west. King Herod was not aware of this unique star in the sky. It appeared at an exact time and endured over time. And according to Matthew, it was in front of the wise men when they traveled south from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, and then it stopped over Bethlehem. So these are some kind of like clues that have been used by astronomers to try to explain the Star of Bethlehem. And although it's referred to as a star, it actually definitely was not. On the time scale of humans, stars appear fixed in our night sky and unchanging. So they're so distant that they're not moving fast enough to the naked eye for us to see them. And astrology at the time actually didn't focus on stars themselves either. Mostly astrology was focused on specific astronomical events, such as conjunctions of stars and planets, the last appearance of a star before sunrise, supernovae. And so it would have been unlikely that the wise men, which were probably astronomers or astrologers at the time, would have thought that just any random star in the sky would be something worth noting and following. So, like I mentioned, one of the clues that was found in the gospel verse is that it says in the east, which can be interpreted as this object was rising. So it could have been what we call a heliacal rising, where a constellation or a planet appears in the sky just before sunrise. For example, the appearance of Venus as the morning star. Venus was very well known to astronomers for a long time, but so that also means it probably wasn't particularly special all on its own. But it could have been significant if it was paired with another planet, such as Jupiter, in a conjunction. So a planetary conjunction, there were actually about 7 of them recorded at this particular time. We're talking about 2 to 3 BC, or I guess I should say 3 to 2 BC. This is the time frame we're referring to of when the Star of Bethlehem was expected to be around. And that's also based on the lifetime of King Herod, because he passed around this time as well. So he had to have been alive when the wise men had approached him in Jerusalem. So a conjunction is when two objects appear in our night sky to be close to one another. So when we look up into the night sky, we project a celestial sphere, we call it, up into the sky, and we put coordinates on it that are very similar to longitude and latitude. On Earth, we project these longitude and latitude lines onto the celestial sphere. These are called right ascension and declination, also known as RA and Dec. This is something I'll cover in my Intro to Astronomy course if you tune in on Wednesday evenings with me. But so when two objects or more come near each other in these celestial sphere coordinates, it's called a conjunction. And some of the conjunctions that were noted during this particular time were between Jupiter and Venus and a star called Regulus. And it's interesting that actually Jupiter is called the king planet and the star Regulus is called the king star. But most notably, there was a triple conjunction of Jupiter, Venus, and Regulus around this time that could have been something that the wise men would have seen as unique and special to follow. Another consequence of a planetary conjunction is that if it's two objects, when the one that is nearer to us appears larger than the farther one, so say if the moon and Jupiter are going to be in conjunction, the moon appears larger than Jupiter. So if the moon passes in front of Jupiter, it will completely obscure Jupiter behind it. This is called an occultation. Another occultation you might know of is the solar eclipse. When the moon completely covers the sun, they're in conjunction because they're so close to one another in our celestial sphere, not actually in the sky, but in what appears to us. And when the moon fully covers the sun, that's called an occultation. So they're pretty common actually when the moon occults a planet. And one of the ones that was possible was an occultation of Jupiter by the moon in the constellation Aries. So I mentioned, astrology back then was really big. And so where these astronomical events were happening in the night sky, in particular constellations, meant something to the people at the time. So an unusual conjunction is a very high candidate for what the Star of Bethlehem could have been. I mentioned the wise men were probably astrologers. They would have kept a close watch on conjunctions between the moon and the stars and planets because it meant something to them. And there were several around this time which might have led them to decide that something was worth following, that it was important. So if there was a conjunction in the east, it would have led them in that direction. There are a few other examples of theories out there for what this could have been, though, even though the planetary conjunction seems to be the leading theory, we don't have proof that that's what it was. So another possibility is that the Star of Bethlehem was actually a comet. We do get unusually bright comets in the night sky, and they've been described to be hanging over particular cities or lands when they're not moving very quickly to the naked eye. So the Star of Bethlehem had appeared kind of static in their night sky at the time. That's how they were able to follow it. We know that Halley's Comet was visible in this area in 12 BC, and it would have been bright enough that you might have described it as a star. So that's something, one of these 9 clues I mentioned earlier, is that this bright thing in the night sky was described as a star. Even though we're saying it's not a star, it was described as such. So it has to be very bright. But the thing is that at this time, they likely would have not at this time when it was seen, but at the later time when the book of Matthew was written, because that was written later, they likely would have known the difference between a comet and a star. And so the fact that the event was specifically noted as a star, we're not super sure that it could have been a comet. But the other thing is that at this time in astrology, comets were generally seen as bad omens. So it would be unlikely that the wise men would have wanted to follow it if they knew it was a comet. So if it was a comet, it would have had to been something very bright that wasn't moving very fast, and they wouldn't have actually known that it was such. Another possibility is a supernova, which is an explosion of a star as it lives out its lifetime. So stars, they're born out of gas clouds. they collapse into fireballs. And when they're massive enough, so way more massive than our sun, they keep collapsing onto themselves after they live out their life. And then all of this matter is squished together in the core, and the pressure is so intense it winds up exploding back out into space. Something that you can see really often over at Slooh through our telescopes that are beautiful are called supernova remnants. So after the explosion, there's this ring or spherical shape almost of gas and dust from the explosion that gets spread out really far into space. And there's a dense core left over of what the star was. But the supernova remnant, beautiful colors. There are so many that you can look at through our telescopes. They really are a great sight. The Crab Nebula is a very famous one. And actually, I think that's visible right now in our sky. So I'm just going to pop over to my notes real quick and see what I can recommend that you look at that's similar to this right now. Yep, the Crab Nebula is visible all night. It was actually the supernova itself, the event that caused the Crab Nebula, was visible during the day to the Chinese astronomers that recorded it. That's how bright these supernovae are. When the stars explode, their light can totally outshine the galaxy that they're in. And it can be, when it happens in our own galaxy, it can be visible during the day. So if you wanted to look up a supernova remnant, I suggest the Crab Nebula. It's one of the most famous ones. Other things you can look at if you wanted to, we talked about comets. If you wanted to observe a comet, comet C 2017 T1, also known as Heinz Comet, is looking good and visible most of the night right now. For conjunctions, there's one in the pre-dawn hours this week. There's a bright star. I really hesitate to try to pronounce this name, but it starts with a Z, Zubinelgenubi. And it's in a conjunction with Jupiter. And then also, but Mars will be near this as well. The star and Jupiter and Mars are about 30 degrees above the horizon just as dawn starts to break. So if you have a clear low eastern horizon, you should be able to see this. You also might be able to see Mercury. So definitely take a look out in the sky this week for some of these things that might have, these particular events wouldn't have been confused with the Star of Bethlehem, but these are examples of events that could have been. So back to supernovae, if it was a supernova, they wouldn't be seeing the supernova remnant that I'm saying is a beautiful thing to look at through the telescopes. They would have actually seen the explosion, which is just a star getting much brighter in the night sky for a few days. And so it is a static event. It does last for X amount of time, and it doesn't last forever, and it's something that is unique and wouldn't have been there before. So it does match the biblical description, and it could have been taken as a good omen, something that they would want to follow. And it appears kind of like a new star. Like I said, you might not even have noticed that the star was there in the first place until it went supernova. And it would be brighter, potentially, than any of the planets in the night sky as well. Chinese and Korean astronomers were very up-to-date, keeping tabs on the events in the night sky, particularly novae and supernovae. And they noted the appearance of a nova in 5 BC, which is around the right time frame, but it wasn't noted by astronomers in other regions, which doesn't mean it didn't happen, but it means it wasn't probably particularly bright. So it's not, the fact that there is no concrete recording of such a nova or supernova event where the wise men would have been makes it hard for this to probably be the Star of Bethlehem. But also a truly bright nova or supernova would have created a remnant that we should still be able to see today. And there is no known remnant that can be dated back to this time. It's possible that there could have been a supernova in the Andromeda galaxy because it's close by and we'd be able to see it. But again, there's no astronomical record of such an event. It is hard for us to see a supernova remnant in the Andromeda galaxy. So they might have seen the supernova, but then we can't see the remnant now. But without, a definite observation, it's difficult for us to really constrain that would have been the answer. And again, back to the heliacal rising, where they noted that this star was in the east, which could be taken as rising. It could be just the routine appearance of a constellation or an asterism. An asterism is a constellation or a pattern of stars in the sky that might not actually be noted as one of the constellations defined by the IAU. The International Astronomical Union defines 88 constellations for astronomers to use to describe the regions of space. And so if there's a pattern of stars in the sky, one of my favorites is Felix the Cat. It was a constellation that an astronomer back in the day saw a cat pattern in the stars, but then the IAU decided it wasn't going to be considered one of the 88 defined constellations. So it's like the little forgotten cat. And so that would be considered an asterism. So just the routine appearance of a constellation rising in the east could have been enough for astrologers at the time to consider worth following and unique. One other thing that I actually just learned about myself by doing some research on this topic for you all is that planets, they appear from our position on Earth to have a retrograde motion, meaning that they actually go backwards in their orbit. Well, I shouldn't say actually. They appear to be going backwards in their orbit. They're actually not doing so, but because of where we stand in space compared to them, it looks like planets are moving around the sun in the proper way. And then when they get to the opposite side of the sun from where we are, they appear to sort of go backwards for a little bit and then move forward again. And so it can be described that planets in their orbit have what we call a stationary point, where it looks like they're not moving. So Jupiter had an apparent retrograde motion on December 25th of 2 BC over the town of Bethlehem. So if they had noticed that Jupiter was not moving, it would have been a unique star. It would have appeared as a star to them. It would have been unique because it wouldn't have been there before. It would have endured for only a certain amount of time because then it would have returned to appear to go in its normal orbit. And maybe had they not seen it before, they wouldn't have known what it was and would have thought this was a truly unique event and telling them something. So it's really hard to picture this apparent retrograde motion. So I know I'm not doing a screen share with you all today, but if you want to know more about it, if you Google apparent retrograde motion, there is an image on Wikipedia that shows it pretty well. And in this image, it shows the sun, it shows Earth's orbit, and it shows the orbit of, say, Mars, and then what that looks like to us from our point of view. And so you can see why we would see the stationary point and the retrograde orbit of a planet. So there's several theories on what the Star of Bethlehem could have been. They are the heliacal rising of a constellation or an asterism, a pattern of stars, the apparent retrograde motion of Jupiter, a nova, supernova, or actually even a hypernova, which is just a superluminous supernova. So it's a supernova that's about 10 times brighter than most common supernova. A comet, it could have been an occultation of a planet by the moon. But again, that doesn't seem super likely because they would know what the moon is. So that I don't know that would be described as a star. That's not my personal favorite. But the planetary conjunction of Jupiter, Regulus, and Venus is definitely a likely candidate. And I think that is probably the one that most astronomers would consider when asked this question. But we definitely don't have a concrete answer. And it's likely that we never will. There is no astronomical recording of such an event, and so it's all speculation. There are software and models, and astronomers have tried to, basically do the math to calculate the orbits of what could have been back in that time, but we just haven't been able to constrain a particular astronomical event. It's also difficult because, there's the dates in the Bible aren't super concrete, and so we are guesstimating between, a couple centuries here. So we can't really constrain a specific event. But if somebody asks you what you think the Star of Bethlehem was caused by, I hope I've given you enough information that you can give a educated guess. My answer would probably be the planetary conjunction or a supernova. The supernova I find tough because there is no recording of it, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. So, and then I think my third one would be the apparent retrograde motion of Jupiter. So you could always quote saying that this is what I said. But again, we don't have a specific answer for what it could have been. So you are free to dream about whatever you wanted it to be. And if you're interested in reading more about it, there's a really great story over on Slooh.com under the Illumination section. Arthur C. Clarke is an author that wrote a nice little short story about the Star of Bethlehem and what it could have been from an astronomical point of view, if it was a supernova. And it's just really well written. I recommend it. You can find it under a post by Karen Stevens over on our website. So, and I will actually make a short little post about this under the live cast section describing some of the astronomical events that I talked about today. And that way I can share with you this image about the apparent retrograde motion of what, this image just describes Earth and Mars, but it could have been Jupiter at the time that would have been representative of the Star of Bethlehem. So I hope you all have a wonderful holiday, and I hope that I gave you some astronomical thoughts to consider as you celebrate this holiday or celebrate these holidays as you wish. And if anybody asks you what the Star of Bethlehem was, I think the final answer is we have no idea. So feel free to dream about whatever you'd like. Remember, this week there's a lot of cool things to see through our telescopes at Slooh.com. We've got planetary conjunctions. We can see the Crab Nebula, which is a supernova remnant of a really bright supernova that could have been similar to what the wise men saw. And we also have Mars is starting to be visible in the night sky, so keep an eye out for that. You can also see Comet Hines in our night sky as well if you wanted to watch a comet go by, which could have been what hung over Jerusalem. So keep an eye on the skies, and I hope you enjoy this holiday, and I hope you have clear skies as you do.